At my son's annual family cookout, my phone lit up with a cryptic message. Walk away. Don't talk to anyone. Now. I fled quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. Just seconds after my car turned the corner, the entire street was swarming with cops, their lights painting the perfect suburban homes in terrifying shades of red and blue. That single text message saved me from a nightmare I never saw coming, a nightmare orchestrated by my own daughter-in-law. But to understand how it came to that, we have to go back to the beginning of that dreadful afternoon, just an hour earlier. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of this story, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. It's amazing to think my story can reach so many people. Drop your city or country in the comments, and maybe what time it is where you are. Okay, let's get back to it. The drive to my son David's house in the suburbs of Denver was always pleasant. The kind of neighborhood with identical, perfectly manicured lawns and kids' bicycles left carelessly on the sidewalk. It was a picture of American domestic bliss. A picture my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, had worked tirelessly to paint. I'm Carol, by the way, and at 65, I've learned that pictures can be deceiving. I loved my son David more than life itself. And because I loved him, I tried my best to love his wife. But after 8 years, trying was still the operative word. Tiffany was polished. That's the best word for her. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her outfits looking like they'd been plucked from a magazine for wealthy socialites. She was the epitome of grace and charm to outsiders. To me, she was a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. There was always a subtle correction, a gentle undermining disguised as kindness. "Oh, Carol, let me get that for you. It looks heavy," she'd say, snatching a bag of groceries that was perfectly manageable. Or she'd rearrange the dishwasher I'd just loaded, smiling sweetly as she said, "This way just fits a little more, sweetie." Each gesture was a tiny pinprick, a reminder that, in her world, I was slightly inadequate, a little old-fashioned, a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be cherished. My grandchildren, Lily and Mason, were the only reasons I endured these increasingly tense family events. They were my sunshine. At 7 and 5, they still ran to me, their arms wide open, their faces alight with pure, uncomplicated love. I treasured these moments, hoarding them like precious jewels, because a part of me knew, deep down, that they were numbered. As I pulled into their driveway that afternoon, the smell of sizzling burgers on the grill filled the air. I saw David by the barbecue, taking direction from Tiffany, who pointed with a manicured finger, a queen directing her subject. I took a deep breath, pasting a smile on my face. I told myself it was just a cookout, just a few hours. I could handle a few hours of feeling like an unwelcome guest for the sake of my son and his children. I could endure the knot in my stomach, the familiar tension that coiled in my chest whenever Tiffany was near. I had to, for my family. I had no idea that this would be the last time I ever pretended. I didn't know that the perfect facade was about to be shattered into a million pieces. But little did I know, this afternoon would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. To really understand Tiffany's methods, her unique brand of cruelty, I need to tell you about what happened 2 weeks before the cookout. It's an incident I had tried to dismiss, to push away, but it was the first real crack in her perfect veneer, the first time I felt a genuine flicker of fear. It was a Tuesday, and I was over at their house helping to watch the kids while David was at a teacher conference. Tiffany was preparing a large pot of pasta for dinner, the water bubbling furiously on the stovetop. I was standing at the counter nearby, helping Lily with a drawing. The afternoon had been pleasant, almost normal. "Carol, could you grab the large colander from that cabinet for me?" Tiffany asked, her voice light and airy. I turned, moving towards the cabinet she'd indicated. As my back was to her, I heard a sudden sharp gasp, a clatter of metal, and then a searing heat licked at the back of my ankles. I yelped and jumped forward, my heart leaping into my throat. The floor behind me was flooded with steaming, boiling water. The heavy pot lay on its side. If I had been just one step slower, 1 inch closer, my legs would have been covered in second-degree burns. "Oh my God, Carol!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice pitched with what sounded like sheer panic. "I am so sorry. It just slipped." My heart was hammering, a mix of shock and relief that I hadn't been seriously injured. I'm fine, I stammered, my legs trembling. But as I looked at her, something felt wrong. Her eyes, wide with alarm, weren't focused on my well-being. They were focused on David, who had just walked in from the garage. Her performance shifted instantly. The panic in her voice morphed into a deep theatrical concern directed entirely at him. "David, thank God you're home," she said, rushing to his side. "I am so shaken. The pot just slipped out of my hands. Mom, she didn't even react at first. She just stood there. I had to scream for her to move." I stared at her, dumbfounded. That wasn't what happened. I had jumped back instantly. It was pure reflex. But David was looking at me now, his face a mask of worry. "Mom, are you okay? You didn't get burned?" "No, honey, I'm fine. I moved out of the way," I said, my voice sounding weak to my own ears. "She almost didn't," Tiffany insisted, clutching David's arm. "Honestly, David, it scared me. Her reflexes, they seem so slow lately. I'm just so worried about her being home alone all the time. What if something like this happens and no one is around?" And just like that, the narrative was flipped. It was no longer about a clumsy accident in the kitchen. It was about my declining competence, my supposed fragility. I stood there, silent, as my daughter-in-law expertly planted a seed of doubt in my son's mind. She made me feel foolish, clumsy, and worst of all, old. She had taken a moment of potential danger and twisted it into evidence for a case she was building against me. A case that I was becoming a burden, a liability, a case that I needed to be managed. I tried to forget it. I told myself she was just overwrought, that I was being paranoid. But the memory lingered, a cold spot in the back of my mind. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, and I had been the unwilling student. And that incident, that so-called accident, became the very weapon she would use against me at the cookout in front of everyone.
The cookout was in full swing. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and freshly cut grass, punctuated by the cheerful shrieks of children running through sprinklers. On the surface, it was idyllic. But for me, the tension was a physical presence, a weight on my shoulders. Tiffany was at the top of her game, flitting between guests with a brilliant smile, a perfect hostess in her natural habitat. Her campaign against me began subtly, as it always did. When I went to get a plate of food, she intercepted me, taking the plate from my hands. "Oh, Carol, let me get that for you," she said, her voice loud enough for several nearby parents to hear. "You just go sit down and relax. Don't you worry about a thing." It sounded kind, but the subtext was clear. You're too frail to even carry your own plate of potato salad. Later, I was sitting on the edge of the sandbox with my grandson, Mason, helping him build a castle. He was giggling, patting sand into a bucket. It was a moment of pure, simple joy. Tiffany glided over, a glass of expensive-looking white wine in her hand. "Mom, be careful there," she cooed, touching my shoulder lightly. "You don't want to slip and fall." She smiled at the other moms sitting nearby, a conspiratorial, knowing smile. "See, I have to watch her like a hawk." I felt my cheeks burn with a familiar shame. I was 65, not 95. I was in perfect health. I still took long walks every day and managed my own home. But in her presence, I was reduced to a fragile, incompetent old woman. The final act came about an hour into the party. The kids were eating ice cream, and most of the adults were gathered around the patio table. Tiffany came and sat beside me, her proximity feeling like an invasion. She placed a cool hand on my arm. "Carol," she said, her voice dropping to a serious, confidential tone, "we need to talk." She led me to a quiet corner of the deck, away from the chatter. "I don't want to upset you," she began, the classic opening for someone who is about to do exactly that. "But after that incident with the boiling water the other week, David and I have been talking. We're concerned." I steeled myself. "Concerned about what, Tiffany?" "About your safety," she said, her eyes wide with feigned sincerity. "And, well, the children's safety, too. You seemed so disoriented that day. What if you were watching Lily and Mason and something happened? What if you had a fall? Or forgot something on the stove?" Every word was a carefully aimed dart designed to make me doubt myself, to make me feel unreliable. She was painting me as a doddering old fool, a danger to my own grandchildren. It was humiliating. And I have to ask you all, if you were in my shoes, hearing this from your daughter-in-law, while your son stood by and let it happen, what would you have done? Would you have screamed, cried, walked away? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know. I just sat there, frozen, my voice caught in my throat. I felt trapped, silenced by her web of twisted concern. I looked over at David, hoping for some sign of support, but he was deep in conversation with another guest, oblivious to the character assassination taking place just a few feet away. I was completely on my own. She leaned in, her perfume cloying and expensive, her voice a sickeningly sweet whisper. "And that's why David and I think it's time to establish some boundaries, just to make sure everyone stays safe." And right as those words stabbed into me, my phone buzzed in my purse. A message that would blow her perfect world to pieces. The vibration of my phone was a lifeline. It was a reason to look away from Tiffany's perfectly painted face, a reason to break the suffocating spell of her words. "Excuse me," I murmured, my voice hoarse. I pulled my phone from my purse, expecting a message from a friend or a notification from my bank. What I saw made the blood drain from my face. It was a text from an unknown number. Just a few words, stark and black against the white screen. "Walk away. Don't talk to anyone. Now." I stared at it, my mind struggling to comprehend. Walk away from what? Who was this? It felt like a prank, a bizarre and cruel joke. I glanced up at Tiffany, who was watching me with a look of mild irritation, her power play interrupted. "Everything all right, Carol?" she asked, with a slight edge to her voice. I, I need to take this," I mumbled, my throat suddenly dry. My phone buzzed again, this time more insistently. I looked down. The same number, the same message, but this time it was in all capital letters, screaming with an urgency that I couldn't ignore. "Leave now. Don't look back." My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. This was not a joke. I didn't know how I knew. I just did. A primal instinct, a wave of pure dread washed over me. The carefully constructed world of the suburban cookout dissolved, and all I felt was a cold, sharp fear. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up on legs that felt like jelly. I need to go home." Tiffany's expression shifted from annoyance to a flicker of something else. Triumph! She had pushed me and I was retreating. In her mind, she had won. "Oh, of course, Carol," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy again. "Do you need David to drive you?" No," I said a little too quickly. The message had said, "Don't talk to anyone." "No, I'll be fine. I just need some air." I didn't wait for her reply. I turned and walked not towards the front door where I'd have to pass David and the other guests, but to the side gate that led to the front yard. Every step felt like I was wading through molasses. I could feel Tiffany's eyes on my back. I half expected her to call out, to stop me, to demand an explanation. But she didn't. The sounds of the party continued behind me. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses. It was surreal, this bubble of normalcy continuing on while my own personal reality was fracturing. My hand was shaking as I fumbled with the latch on the side gate. It finally clicked open, and I slipped out onto the quiet, tree-lined street. The air felt different out here. Cooler. Cleaner. I was free of her suffocating presence. I walked as quickly as I could without breaking into a run, my keys clutched in my sweaty palm. My car was parked just across the street. I got in, locked the doors, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a comforting, solid sound in the sudden silence. I took one last look back at the house, at the perfect brick facade and the cheerful party still visible on the back deck. Everything looked exactly the same. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that nothing would ever be the same again. My hand was shaking as I put the car in drive. I was about to pull away, to flee from a danger I couldn't name, when my rearview mirror was suddenly violently flooded with flashing red and blue lights.
I slammed on the brakes, my body thrown forward against a seatbelt. My car hadn't even moved a full foot. A police cruiser, lights blazing but sirens silent, screeched to a halt, blocking the entrance to David and Tiffany's driveway. Then another, and another. Within 30 seconds, the idyllic, peaceful suburban street looked like a scene from a Hollywood blockbuster. It wasn't just local police. I saw black SUVs pull up, the kind with tinted windows you see in the movies. Men in tactical gear, wearing vests that said FBI, emerged from the vehicles carrying rifles. They moved with a quiet, terrifying efficiency, fanning out, securing the perimeter. Radios crackled with urgent, coded language I couldn't understand. I sat there, frozen in my driver's seat, my engine still running. This couldn't be real. This was my son's home. My grandchildren were in there. I watched in abject horror as the team of armed officers moved purposefully up the driveway and towards the front door. The party on the deck had come to an abrupt halt. I could see the guests now, standing frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. The music had been cut off. The children's laughter had been silenced. My own son, David, stood on the patio, a half-eaten hot dog bun still in his hand, his face pale with shock. Neighbors began to trickle out of their houses, drawn by the silent flashing lights. Their cell phones were out, their screens held up to record the unbelievable scene unfolding in their quiet community. The perfect facade of Tiffany's life wasn't just cracking, it was being sledgehammered into dust right before my eyes. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, startling me out of my trance. It was the unknown number again. "Are you safe? Don't go back. I'll explain everything later." A wave of nausea rolled through me. Whoever this person was, they had known. They had known this was going to happen. They hadn't just warned me to leave a tense family argument, they had saved me from being caught in the middle of a federal raid. My mind was a chaotic storm of unanswerable questions. What had Tiffany done? My daughter-in-law, the woman who obsessed over organic snacks for her children and the perfect shade of grayish for her living room walls. What kind of crime warranted this level of law enforcement? Identity theft? Financial fraud? The words seemed preposterous, utterly disconnected from the woman I thought I knew. I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay. I couldn't face David. I couldn't answer the questions I knew the police would have. With trembling hands, I put the car in drive again and slowly pulled away from the curb, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I watched as my son's life, my family's life, imploded in a silent storm of flashing lights. I drove for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I was on autopilot, my mind reeling. I finally pulled into a brightly lit gas station, my body shaking uncontrollably. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who had warned me? And what in God's name had Tiffany done to bring the full force of the law down on her perfect little life? I sat in the sterile brightness of the gas station parking lot for nearly an hour, trying to make my heart stop pounding. I watched other people come and go, living their normal lives, pumping gas, buying coffee, complaining about the price of milk. My own life felt like it had been detonated. Finally, my phone rang and my stomach plummeted when I saw David's name on the screen. I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I answered, my hand trembling. "Mom? Mom, where are you? What happened?" His voice was a raw mix of fear and confusion. I had to leave, honey. I wasn't feeling well," I lied, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Not feeling well? Mom, the police are here, the FBI. They're tearing the house apart. They have a warrant for everything. They're asking about Tiffany, about her business, her computer." His voice cracked. "Mom, they're talking about a massive fraud investigation. Identity theft on a huge scale. This has to be a mistake, right?" I closed my eyes, the pieces of a puzzle I never knew I was a part of starting to click into place with sickening clarity. Tiffany, with her expensive tastes that always seemed to outpace David's modest teacher salary. The designer clothes, the luxury SUV, the kitchen remodel that cost a fortune. I had always assumed she had family money or savings I didn't know about. I never imagined it could be funded by crime. What are they saying, David?" I whispered. "They're saying she's been running some kind of sophisticated scheme for years, using people's personal information to open credit cards, take out loans, create fake companies." He took a ragged breath. "They've been watching the house for weeks. They mentioned a business she runs, a consulting service for seniors." A consulting service for seniors. The phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought back to the years after my husband Frank passed away. I had been grieving, overwhelmed by the mountain of paperwork, the complexities of his estate. Tiffany had swept in like an angel of mercy. She had offered to help me sort through everything, to set up online banking, to organize my bills. I had been so grateful, so relieved to have her seemingly expert help. She had sat with me for hours, asking what I thought were innocent questions. My mother's maiden name for a family tree project, my social security number for emergency contact forms at the kids' school, details about Frank's finances, while she helped me with the estate. Each piece of information, I had handed it over willingly, never suspecting it was being collected, cataloged, and weaponized. I had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker, and I had the terrifying feeling that this was only the beginning. After I hung up with David, I sat in my car, the reality of the situation washing over me in waves of nausea. My own daughter-in-law had been stealing from me. She had used my grief and my trust as tools to systematically plunder my identity. I felt stupid, violated, and utterly alone. I didn't know where to go or what to do. Going home felt wrong, unsafe. Just then, my phone buzzed again, the unknown number. "You can't go home tonight. She'll know you were warned. She might have people watching."
My hands started shaking again. People watching? This was escalating into something out of a spy movie, not my quiet, retired life in Colorado. I typed back, my fingers fumbling on the small screen. "Who is this? Why are you helping me?" The reply was almost instantaneous. "My name isn't important right now. I'm helping you because I was almost one of her victims too. She destroys people, Carol. You need to be careful." Another message followed immediately. "Find a motel for the night. Pay with cash." Pay with cash? The paranoia of it all should have made me dismiss it, but after what I'd just witnessed, it felt like the sanest advice in the world. But a more pressing question burned in my mind. I typed, "Why should I trust you?" The response that came back made my phone slip from my trembling hands and clatter onto the floor of my car. I stared down at the screen, the words glowing with a sinister light. "Because 3 months ago, Tiffany filed the preliminary paperwork to have you declared mentally incompetent so she could get power of attorney over your finances.
I have the copies. I felt the air leave my lungs in a whoosh. I picked up the phone, my breath catching in my throat. Mentally incompetent. Power of attorney. It wasn't just a stray thought or a cruel comment at a party. It was a legal strategy. The boiling water accident, the constant remarks about my forgetfulness, the way she had convinced David I was struggling with technology. It was all part of a calculated, monstrous plan. She hadn't been trying to help me with my finances. She had been trying to gain complete legal control over them, to lock me away in my own mind, and then, in reality, while she drained my life savings, she was going to erase me. My fingers, numb with shock, typed back a single desperate question: how? How do you know this? She only backed down when David refused to sign the final affidavit without talking to you first, the texter replied. His hesitation saved you. For now. We need to meet. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Washington Park, by the duck pond. Come alone. I have things you need to see. My mind was a war zone of fear and a desperate need for answers. Meeting a complete stranger in a park based on anonymous texts seemed reckless, the kind of thing Tiffany herself would point to as evidence of my declining mental state. But what choice did I have? This person, whoever they were, clearly knew more about my daughter-in-law's dark secrets than anyone else. They held the key to understanding how my life had been so thoroughly corrupted from the inside out. The image of armed FBI agents storming my son's home flashed in my mind. The memory of Tiffany's saccharine voice telling me I was a danger to my grandchildren. The cold, hard words on my phone screen. Mentally incompetent. There was no other choice. I had to know. I had to face the monster that had been sleeping in my son's bed for 8 years. I typed back one word. Okay. Mentally incompetent. The words echoed in my head, a terrifying drumbeat. This wasn't just about money. This was about my freedom, my identity, my very sanity. I had to meet this person. I had to know everything. That night, I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind with a flickering neon sign and carpets that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. I paid in cash as instructed, feeling like a fugitive in my own life. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tiffany's smiling face, her eyes cold and calculating. I saw the legal documents I never signed, the credit cards I never used. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen my peace of mind, my sense of security, my trust in my own family. The next morning, I arrived at Washington Park 30 minutes early, my nerves a tangled mess. The park was beautiful, peaceful. Families were feeding the ducks, joggers were looping around the lake. It was a world away from the ugly reality I was now living in. At exactly 10 a.m., a woman approached my bench. She was probably in her late 40s with tired eyes that held a familiar, haunted look. She looked like a survivor. Carol? She asked, quietly. I nodded, and she sat down, leaving a careful distance between us. My name is Sharon, she said, her voice low. Thank you for coming, and thank you for trusting me. You have the paperwork? I asked, needing to see the proof to make the nightmare tangible. She nodded, pulling a manila folder from her large purse. She opened it on her lap. And there it was, photocopies of legal forms, petitions to the court. My name was typed neatly at the top. The petition detailed my recent cognitive decline, citing my confusion with simple financial matters and increasing paranoia. It was all there, a legal roadmap to my own erasure, drafted by my daughter-in-law. I was Tiffany's accountant, Sharon explained, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Or at least that's how it started. She hired me to manage the books for her consulting business. It all seemed legitimate at first, helping seniors with estate planning, bill management. It sounded noble. She gave a short, bitter laugh. But then I started seeing things that didn't add up. Money moving through shell corporations, invoices for services that were never rendered. And then I found the files, the real files. She explained that she wasn't just an employee. Tiffany had framed her for an initial discrepancy, and to clear her own name, Sharon had spent months painstakingly recovering data Tiffany had tried to scrub from a shared server. What she found was a criminal enterprise. She has at least a dozen other victims that I know of, Sharon said, her voice dropping to a whisper. All like you, recently widowed, financially comfortable, with adult children who trust their wives to handle the family finances. She researches them for months, sometimes years. She doesn't meet her targets by accident, Carol. She hunts them. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. So she targeted David to get to me? Sharon looked at me with deep, sorrowful eyes. She chose David because he was the perfect key to the perfect lock. He was kind, trusting, and he loved his mother. He gave her access to you, and you were her ideal profile. Grieving, overwhelmed, and with a healthy estate. The entire marriage was a business transaction. My mind reeled. The last 8 years, every family dinner, every holiday, every shared laugh, it was all a lie. A long, elaborate, and cruel performance. I have copies of everything, Sharon continued, pulling out more papers. Credit card applications in my name with forged signatures that were terrifyingly close to my own. Bank statements from accounts I never knew existed, with thousands of dollars flowing through them. 17 different accounts, Sharon said. And a small business loan for $50,000 taken out in my name. But then Sharon looked at me, her eyes filled with a chilling gravity, and said, Carol, stealing identities was just part of it. The FBI is involved because 2 of her previous clients, 2 women just like you who started asking too many questions about their accounts, died under very suspicious circumstances. One from an accidental overdose of her medication, another from a fall down the stairs.
The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a thief, she was a predator. And possibly a killer. I sat on that park bench, the cheerful sounds of children playing suddenly sounding muted and distant. My problem wasn't just about recovering stolen money or clearing my name. It was about survival. What do we do? I whispered, my voice barely audible. We give everything we have to the police, Sharon said firmly. But you need to be prepared, Carol. Tiffany doesn't go down without a fight. She will try to destroy you. How right she was. The proof came just 2 days later. I was staying in a small, extended-stay hotel, feeling like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. My phone rang, and it was my dear friend Margaret from my church group. Carol, honey, I was just calling to check on you, she said, her voice laced with an unusual note of concern. Is everything all right? I'm going through some family things, Margaret, I said vaguely. It's complicated. There was a hesitant pause. Well, that's what I was afraid of. Dear, I don't want to overstep, but Tiffany called me yesterday. My stomach clenched. She did? What did she want? Oh, she was just so worried about you, she said, her voice dripping with sympathy that was now, I realized, completely misplaced. She was in tears, Carol. She said you've been having some episodes, that you've been very forgetful, even paranoid. She said there was a big blow-up at the party and you stormed out and that you haven't been answering David's calls. She said she's terrified you're going to hurt yourself. I sank down onto the scratchy hotel bedspread, my head spinning. It was happening. Sharon had warned me, but hearing it, feeling it, was something else entirely. Tiffany wasn't waiting for the legal system to play out. She was launching a preemptive strike. She was methodically moving through my life, poisoning the wells of my friendships, painting me as an unstable old woman to the very people I would need for support.
She was building a narrative, one where she was the concerned, loving daughter-in-law, and I was the senile, paranoid old woman who was losing her grip on reality. If and when I came forward with my story, who would they believe? The charming, put-together young mother, or the confused old woman she had so carefully described? "Margaret," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that surprised me, "whatever Tiffany told you, it's a lie. A calculated, vicious lie." "Oh, Carol, of course, dear. You just take care of yourself." She didn't believe me. Not really. Tiffany's performance had been too convincing. After I hung up, I felt a new kind of fear. It wasn't just fear of Tiffany, but fear of being utterly alone, of having my own truth stolen from me. She wasn't just content with my money and my identity. She wanted my reputation, my relationships, my credibility. She was trying to isolate me, to cut me off from my entire support system, leaving me with no one to turn to and no one who would believe me. She wasn't just planning to defend herself in court. She was trying to burn my entire world down around me before I could even speak. And I wondered, who else had she called? Who else now thought I was losing my mind? I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to talk to David, not on the phone, but face to face. He needed to hear everything from me, to see the proof with his own eyes before Tiffany's poison could seep any deeper into his mind. We agreed to meet at the playground behind the elementary school where he taught. It was neutral ground, a place filled with memories of a simpler, happier time when he was a little boy who believed his mom could fix anything. He was sitting on a bench when I arrived, looking 10 years older than he had just a few days ago. His face was etched with exhaustion and confusion. My heart ached for him. He was a victim in this just as much as I was, his life and his love used as a tool in a monstrous scheme. Lily and Mason were on the swings, their laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. They knew something terribly wrong was happening. "Mom," he said, his voice raw as I sat down beside him, "I don't understand any of this. The police are saying things, I just can't wrap my head around it. How could the woman I married be capable of this?" I took his hand, the same hand I used to hold when he'd scraped his knee or woken from a nightmare. "Honey," I began, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside me, "the woman you married isn't who you think she is. She isn't who any of us thought she was." For the next hour, I laid it all out. I told him about Sharon, the ex-accountant. I showed him the copies of the forged credit card applications and the petition to have me declared incompetent. I told him about the other victims, the other grieving widows. I told him about the smear campaign, how Tiffany was already calling my friends to paint me as mentally unstable. And then, my voice dropping, I told him about the 2 women who had died. I watched his face as he listened, the progression of emotions a painful storm to witness. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then dawning horror, and finally a deep, soul-crushing anguish. The illusion of his 8-year marriage was crumbling before my eyes, turning to dust. "She researched us," he said finally, his voice hollow, staring blankly at the wood chips on the ground. "Before we even met. She knew Dad had died. She knew you were alone. She knew my salary." He let out a bitter, choked laugh. "I remember our first few dates. She was so interested in my family, in you. I thought she was so caring. She was doing opposition research on her target." "It's not your fault, David," I said softly. "She's a professional, a predator. She fools everyone." "But I brought her into our lives," he shot back, his anguish turning to self-loathing. "I brought her into your life. I gave her the keys, Mom. I let her hurt you. I stood by while she made you feel small, and I told myself it was just normal family stuff." Tears started rolling down his cheeks, unchecked. How do I tell our kids?" he whispered, his voice breaking completely. "How do I explain to Lily and Mason that their mother is a monster who never really wanted them, that their whole life has been a lie?" It was the question I couldn't answer, the collateral damage that was almost too painful to contemplate. Two innocent children caught in the wreckage of their mother's deceptions. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, and asked the question I had been dreading, the one that shattered my heart to answer. Mom, did she ever love me at all? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and heartbreaking. How do you tell your child that the love they built their life upon was a fiction, that their marriage was a strategy, and their children were props?
I chose my words carefully, my heart breaking for him. Honey, I think Tiffany is incapable of loving anyone the way you deserve to be loved. I think she sees people as tools, as assets or liabilities. She saw your kindness, your decency, your devotion to family, and she saw an opportunity. She exploited the best parts of you. I squeezed his hand. But that doesn't make your love for her any less real. The joy you felt, the beautiful children you created, that was real, David. That was all you. He shook his head, a look of profound sadness on his face. It changes everything, Mom. It taints every memory. You know, watching my son break down like that, it was the hardest moment of my life. The pain of seeing your child suffer, knowing you're the one delivering the blow, is a unique kind of agony. I have to wonder, has anyone out there ever had to deliver news that you knew would completely destroy someone you love? It's a terrible, terrible burden. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the kids play, their innocence a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped us. I could see David processing, the gears turning behind his grief-stricken eyes. The sadness began to recede, replaced by something else. A slow burning anger, a steely resolve. He finally turned to me, his eyes clear for the first time since this whole nightmare began. He had made a decision. The victim was gone. I remember now, he said, his voice low and hard. About 3 months ago, she came to me with some papers. She said you'd asked her for help with an advanced directive for your medical care. She said you were worried about becoming a burden and wanted her to have medical power of attorney in case you declined. I never asked her for any such thing, I said, my voice cold. I know that now, he said, clenching his jaw. I told her I wasn't comfortable signing anything about your health without talking to you first. She got so angry. She said I was being difficult, that I didn't understand how these things worked. She pushed hard. He looked me straight in the eye. I refused to sign. I didn't know it then, but I saved you, didn't I? By accident. You did, David. You saved me. He stood up then, pacing back and forth in front of the bench like a caged animal. The grief had been burned away, replaced by pure, focused fury. He was no longer mourning the woman he thought he married. He was preparing for war against the woman she truly was. He clenched his fists, his voice low and firm. She stole 8 years of my life, Mom. She's not going to get away with it. And at that moment, I knew we were no longer victims. We were fighters. A week later, we got the news that Tiffany had been released on bail. A high-powered, expensive lawyer was already spinning a narrative to the press, claiming she was a legitimate businesswoman being framed by a disgruntled ex-employee, Sharon. The next move was as audacious as it was predictable. She wanted to meet. She called David, crying, saying it was all a terrible misunderstanding and that for the sake of the children, he had to give her a chance to explain. It's a trap, I told him. I know, he said, his voice grim, but her lawyer is already making noises about custody.
If I refuse to even speak with her, they'll paint me as unreasonable. I'll meet her, but you're coming with me." So, we found ourselves in a sterile downtown coffee shop, a place with no memories and no emotional attachments. Neutral territory. I saw her before she saw us. She was sitting at a corner table, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a plain gray sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore almost no makeup. She looked younger, softer, and more vulnerable. It was a costume, I realized. Another calculated performance designed to elicit sympathy. The wrongly accused victim. "David," she said as we approached, her voice thick with emotion as she stood to hug him. He stood stiffly, not returning the embrace. Her eyes then fell on me, and her composure flickered for a fraction of a second before the warm, concerned mask slipped back into place. "Carol, I'm so glad you came. We need to clear all of this up." We sat down. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. "I know this is all so confusing," she began, looking earnestly at David. "My business, it's complex. Sometimes to help my clients, I have to move money around in ways that can look strange from the outside. Sharon, she never fully understood the work. She got in over her head, made some mistakes, and now she's trying to blame me to save herself." It was a plausible story if you didn't know the truth. She was calm, articulate, and convincing. "The police said you opened accounts in my mother's name, Tiffany," David said, his voice flat. "I helped her open accounts," she corrected smoothly. "Carol, you remember, don't you? We sat at your kitchen table and went over all the paperwork for the new credit cards to help rebuild your credit score after Frank passed. You signed everything." She looked at me, a hint of pity in her eyes. "Perhaps, with all the stress, your memory of it isn't perfectly clear." There it was again, the subtle, insidious suggestion that I was a confused old woman, but I wasn't confused anymore. My anger was a cold, hard stone in my chest. "I remember perfectly well, Tiffany," I said, my voice firm and clear, surprising even myself. "I remember signing one application for one card. I do not remember signing 17. I do not remember applying for a $50,000 business loan, and I certainly do not remember you starting a smear campaign, calling my friends to tell them I've gone senile." The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a flash of cold fury. The mask had slipped. "You need to be very careful, Carol," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "Making false accusations is a serious crime. It's called slander." "Are you threatening my mother?" asked David, his voice dangerously quiet. "Of course not," she said, recovering quickly, the mask back in place. She stood up, gathering her purse. "This was a mistake. My lawyer advised me not to speak to you without him present." She turned to leave, then paused, delivering her final venomous blow. "I hope you remember that I am the mother of your children, David, when you decide what to do. They need me. Don't let these lies take me away from them." She walked out of that coffee shop, leaving a chill in the air. And I realized the threat wasn't just against me anymore. She was now using my grandchildren as shields. 2 days after the confrontation at the coffee shop, Tiffany's next move arrived. It was delivered by a courier, a massive box addressed to Lillian Mason. David called me, his voice tight with suspicion. "Mom, you should come over. A package just got here from Tiffany." When I arrived, the box was sitting in the middle of the living room, a cheerful, brightly colored object that felt deeply sinister.
With a heavy sigh, David took a knife and slit the tape. The flaps fell open to reveal a treasure trove of the most expensive toys imaginable. There was the giant, limited edition Barbie dream house Lily had been talking about for months.
For Mason, there was an enormous, complex Lego set of the Millennium Falcon, something far beyond his age level, but spectacular to look at. It was a blatant, shameless attempt to buy their affection, a display of wealth she had stolen from me and others like me. But the most insidious part was tucked inside an envelope resting on top. David opened it and read the card aloud, his voice flat. "My dearest Lily and Mason," it began, written in Tiffany's elegant, loopy handwriting. "Mommy misses you more than words can say. I know things are very confusing right now, but please know that I love you to the moon and back. I am fighting very hard to come home to you soon. Enjoy these little gifts. All my love, forever and always, Mommy." It was a masterstroke of manipulation, a Trojan horse delivered to the heart of our family. To the children, it was a message of love from their missing mother. To David, it was a psychological weapon designed to make him feel like a monster for keeping them apart. It was a reminder of the happy family she had manufactured, a direct assault on his resolve. And it almost worked. I saw the conflict in his eyes as he looked from the extravagant toys to the heartfelt, lying words on the card. He ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "She knows exactly what she's doing," he murmured. "She knows this will confuse them. She knows this will make me feel guilty." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a fresh wave of doubt. "What if we're wrong, Mom?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I mean, look at this, the card. What if she really does love them, in her own twisted way? What if I'm about to send my children's mother to prison?" The question hung in the air, sickening and potent. For a split second, she had him. She had planted a seed of doubt, making him question the mountain of evidence, the testimony from Sharon, even his own memories. She was skilled, a true artist of emotional warfare. She knew that a man's love for his children and his guilt over their pain was his greatest vulnerability, and she was exploiting it without a shred of mercy. Tiffany's poison was still working, even from a distance. And I knew we had to find something to counteract it, something so definitive it would extinguish even the smallest flicker of doubt. David's moment of doubt was exactly what Tiffany had been counting on. It was a terrifying glimpse into how she had managed to manipulate so many people for so long. She didn't just create lies, she preyed on people's decency, their capacity for forgiveness, their love for their families. But her latest move, the Trojan horse gift, had an unintended consequence. It solidified David's fury. Seeing her use their own children as pawns in their sick game was the final straw. He called Detective Miller that same afternoon. "I want her stopped," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Whatever you need, you've got it." That call, fueled by a father's protective rage, was the catalyst for the final breakthrough. Detective Miller, armed with a new sense of urgency and fresh information from David, revisited the warrant. He told me later that they had focused on her known computers and files, but David mentioned something Tiffany had once said in passing, a joke about having a secret stash for her most important work. He told them about a high-end encrypted external hard drive she kept in a safe deposit box at a bank across town, a box registered under one of her fake business names. It took another court order, but 2 days later, they had it. It took the FBI's cybercrime unit another full day to break the encryption, and what they found inside was Tiffany's entire operation, laid bare. It was her insurance policy, her secret ledger, her trophy case. It contained detailed spreadsheets of every victim she had ever targeted. Names, social security numbers, net worth, and a column coldly labeled vulnerabilities, grieving, lonely, trusting son, etc. It had every fraudulent account, every stolen dollar meticulously tracked. It was the complete, unvarnished blueprint of her criminal empire. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The real dynamite was in a folder labeled Prospective Targets. Inside was a subfolder with my name on it.
Carol Peterson. It contained a full private investigator's report she had commissioned 6 months before she had even started dating David. It detailed my entire life, my finances after Frank's death, my relationship with David, my circle of friends, my daily routines. It even included surveillance photos of me going to the grocery store, visiting the library. And then there was the PI summary, a cold, clinical assessment that made my blood freeze. It read, "Subject is an ideal target, recently widowed, emotionally vulnerable, possesses significant assets in property and investments. Primary emotional bond is with her only son, David, who exhibits a strong sense of duty and can likely be influenced by a trusted partner. Recommend approach through the son. Subject's trust, once gained, can be easily exploited for financial advantage." This wasn't just a crime of opportunity. My life hadn't been a series of fortunate events for her. It had been a hunt. I was the prey, and she was the patient, methodical predator who had planned every single step of her attack years in advance. She hadn't married a man. She had executed a business plan. Detective Miller called me as soon as he had the report in his hands. He read that final paragraph to me over the phone. "We got her, Carol," he said, his voice grim but satisfied. "She planned to destroy you from day one, and now we have the proof. In a report she paid for herself." The private investigator's report was the final, irrefutable nail in Tiffany's coffin. Faced with her own meticulously documented plan to exploit me, her high-powered lawyer saw the writing on the wall. There would be no trial, no opportunity for her to perform for a jury. Her entire defense, that she was a legitimate businesswoman framed by a disgruntled employee, was obliterated by her own words, her own paid-for research. Her main accomplice, the man who helped her launder the money through a series of shell companies, was shown the same evidence. He folded instantly, agreeing to testify against her entire network in exchange for a reduced sentence. The house of cards didn't just fall, it was incinerated. Tiffany took a plea deal, 20 years in a federal prison. There was no remorse, no apology. In a final act of cold, calculated self-preservation, she signed away her parental rights to Lillian Mason completely. Her lawyer stated it was to give the children a chance at a fresh start. But David and I knew the truth. They were no longer useful to her. They were loose ends, ties to a life she wanted to erase. A mother doesn't abandon her children. A con artist sheds a disguise when it's no longer needed. The months that followed were a blur of healing. It was slow, painful work. David started therapy to process the 8 years of deception. He was a wonderful father, patient and loving, as he helped Lillian Mason navigate a new reality without their mother. He answered their confusing questions with a gentle honesty that made me prouder of him than I have ever been.
We explained that Mommy had made some very bad choices that hurt people, and that she had to go away for a long time because of those choices. We assured them again and again that it was not their fault, that they were loved completely and unconditionally by their father and by me. Our own relationship, which had been strained for so long under Tiffany's subtle influence, was reborn. The distance she had manufactured between us vanished, replaced by an unbreakable bond forged in crisis. We talked, truly talked, for the first time in years. He shared his guilt and his grief. I shared my fear and my anger. We leaned on each other. Sharon and I became the unlikeliest of friends. We had been brought together by trauma, but we stayed together through a shared understanding and a dark, resilient sense of humor. We met for coffee every Tuesday, two survivors who had looked into the abyss and walked away. Together, we even started a small, informal support group online for other victims of financial and elder fraud, a place to share stories and warnings. We were determined to turn our pain into a shield for others.
Slowly, very slowly, life started to feel normal again. Or rather, a new kind of normal. A quieter, more honest normal. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for years finally, blessedly uncoiled. The house was no longer a place of tension, but a home filled with the sound of my grandchildren's laughter. The wounds were deep, and the scars would always remain. But for the first time in nearly a decade, the air in our family was clean. We were free. But the most important conversation, the one that would truly close this chapter, was yet to come.